Welcome back to the Sales Revolution. I'm Ingrid Maynard, founder and managing director of The Sales Doctor. And before I introduce today's guest, I just want to let everybody know that I've written a book and it's also called The Sales Revolution. Funny about that. And you'll see a link to my book, which will take you to the website where you can purchase the book. And if you're not sure whether you're going to like it or not, there's the first chapter there that you can read as a PDF to give you a bit of a taste for the rest of the book. Now we get into the fun stuff. I am joined today by Trudy MacDonald. Now, for those of you who don't remember, Trudy has already been a guest of mine in an earlier podcast, I think within the first maybe 5 or 6 podcasts. But I will introduce her again because today we're speaking about a particular topic. Trudy MacDonald is an award-winning global keynote speaker and expert in people, performance and strategy. As the founder of TalentCode HR, she partners with organisations to create high-performance cultures and solve complex business challenges. A leading authority on remuneration strategies, Trudy helps organisations navigate the complexities of designing remuneration strategies and incentive schemes that align with shifting market factors and evolving employee expectations. With these challenges more relevant than ever, she's here today to share practical insights on retaining top talent and building incentive programs that drive performance and business success. And without further ado, welcome Trudy.
Thank you, Ingrid. It's such a pleasure to be back on the Sales Revolution.
Thank you. Now, I saw, and this is where we reconnected about the podcast and you coming back on, in a recent LinkedIn post, you were talking about this very topic. And I thought, and I'm sure a lot of sales leaders in particular kind of, pricked up their ears that you were also doing a masterclass on this subject. I didn't get to go to that, and that was a real disappointment for me. But I want to start here because salaries for a lot of companies are starting to normalise again, and that's great news because business costs are just going through the roof. So at least salaries are starting to be a little bit more realistic again. But can you just share with us how a business even begins to build a salary package that compels the right people to the company and to the role?
Thanks, Ingrid. I think it's such an important question, and so many leaders struggle with this. You mentioned in the introduction that something I'm very passionate about is dealing with complex business issues to build high-performance teams, and I must say remuneration is right up there. It's a perplexing space, and I think the reason why it's so challenging is a lot of leaders don't really understand the psychology of remuneration. So it goes beyond just benchmarking and how much are we going to pay people. So I might start there if that's okay. What always fascinated me is the understanding that money in itself is not the biggest motivator for people. Now, I think it's interesting because for salespeople, often we think it's all about money and that's what they want. And they are driven by money, and money can be a really powerful motivator if we get it right. However, it's all about fairness at the end of the day. And the way I like to think about it is if we can get the money right for people, where they feel as though they are being fairly rewarded for their contributions and what they are selling, then we can take the money off the table. And then there's a whole range of other things that will actually really fuel the intrinsic motivation of salespeople. And this is where you get discretionary effort, and this is where you get your real sales superstars. They're not superstars because of the money, they're superstars because of the other things. So when I talk to leaders about putting together a salary package for salespeople, I like to think about this concept I refer to as total rewards. And what that refers to is all of the things that the individual gets access to when they work for your organisation. And it's useful to categorise it into 4 areas. So the first is the development opportunities. So what is the professional growth and development that I'm going to get access to when I work for your organisation? The second is culture. So what is it going to feel like when I work for your organisation? And am I going to feel valued? Am I going to feel as though I'm a contributing member of the team where my ideas are heard? Or am I going to feel as though I'm just getting flogged to sell more and more and I don't really have that voice? The third area are benefits. And the way I like to think about benefits is as long as you're part of the organisation, you have access to them. So they're not directly tied to performance in any way. And then the fourth category, which is where we tend to put our attention, is all about remuneration. So that's the financial element. And for salespeople, often it's a base salary, often there's a commission, and then there may be other things such as cars or other allowances. When you look at that total picture, what the research will tell us is on average, and there's always going to be individual differences, the number one motivator for people, if we want to drive higher levels of productivity and performance, is development opportunities, closely followed by culture. So this puts money in context. However, and this is the really important takeaway, if the money is not right and people don't perceive that the remuneration is fair, it's going to be all about the money. And those other things won't have the impact that they should be having. So the takeaway here when we start to look at this from a broader perspective is we need to get the money right. However, money alone is not your key lever to drive high levels of productivity and performance.
I absolutely so appreciate what you've just said there, Trudy, because I recently had a conversation with Bob Nordlinger,
Yes.
and who I know you know very well, and he thinks the world of you. And he was talking with me about Daniel Pink, talking about this topic as well, and saying that remuneration needs to be sufficient so that you take that off the table.
Yes.
So that it is, like you talked about, that concept of fairness. But I appreciate you reinforcing that for my understanding as well. But those development opportunities in the culture, then, becoming the most important thing, it really does put remuneration into its right size, I suppose.
Yeah, it absolutely does. However, we still need to get it right, and it's not necessarily easy. So the research I've seen just in the last few weeks is that as we go into 2025, there's going to be two reasons why people are leaving organisations. The first, and this sits at over 75%, will be lack of development opportunities and growth. So people do want to see career progression, and sales people are no exception. Often when I see the data that says people want career progression and growth, it really means I want more money. The second reason is remuneration. So the two are so closely interconnected. And I think if we look at the broader economic environment, the cost of living continues to go up. People are really feeling the financial pressure. And countering that, so many organisations, so many leaders that I talk to are sharing that the productivity of their sales teams is not where it needs to be. In fact, it's not where it was 5 years ago. Yeah. So what I'm seeing on a macro level is salespeople are not earning the same money that they used to earn. Yeah. And possibly it was easier to earn that money a few years ago. Now they're working harder than ever before. They're burning out. They're earning less. And they're coming to their leaders saying, I need to be paid more. And I've had fascinating conversations with leaders whose teams are saying, readjust my commission scheme. I'm not earning as much as I used to. This isn't fair. But they're not seeing the other side of the equation, which is you're only selling 70% of what you were selling previously.
I can't even get over what you're just saying, because that just, I've got no research to validate my observation, but it's a lived experience. And what I talk about not only in the book, but just in general to my clients, really is about that skill deficit, that capability deficit that
Yes.
I would say it's probably hasn't been there for a couple of decades, if I'm honest, at the level that we need it now, because a few things have shifted. And I think that, COVID brought on a whole set or a suite of behaviours, particularly in salespeople, that unfortunately got them out of the habit of doing a lot of face-to-face meetings, about engaging in a different way, about making the greater levels of effort in order to get those results. And then you bring back that business as usual situation where we can go out and see our clients again, but then the market's tightened. So the skill set that's required in order to be successful at selling today is much deeper, because you need to create opportunity, and sometimes you actually, in terms of effort for the same result, it's 2 to 3, sometimes 4 times as much. And then you need so you need the high level of activity, and then you need a deeper skill set in order to engage and realise that opportunity. So you've got to be able to create it and then convert it. And salespeople don't have those skills. So when you think about the fact that 75% of the reason people leave is because they're not getting, there's 2 reasons. You were saying in 75% of cases it's because of career progression, which is closely tied to growth and, the next job and remuneration, but then closely followed by remuneration.
Yes, that's it, exactly. Yeah. So this is a headline for people right now, and businesses are really struggling with this, because many businesses are going into the second half of the financial year. Their numbers aren't tracking where they need to be. They've got a workforce who, in addition to those things, are also saying, I'm burnt out, and I'm having these conversations on a day-to-day basis. I think for all the reasons that you just mentioned, Ingrid, because it is harder out there.
It is.
So when we start to look at remuneration design, there's 2 other key factors that I think are absolutely critical for leaders to understand. The first is whatever that package looks like needs to be strategically aligned with where you're going as an organisation. Now, on the surface, this sounds like common sense. However, I often see that that's not the case when these structures are designed. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about, as a business, understanding what products and services you're looking to sell, where you can either create a future-proof customer focus, or you can engage with the market in a way that's going to set you up for future success. How do you make sure that your remuneration package for salespeople reflects that? And the classic mistake I often see for a lot of leaders is they've got a sales target. It's a revenue target. It's not a gross margin target. And they can sell whatever they want as long as they hit the number. However, strategically, the organisation is either trying to grow a particular product set, or they're going into a particular region or geography. And unless you get really nuanced with the way your incentives work, you'll find, and this is just human nature, salespeople will take the path of least resistance to get the sale. And what you may find is that they're selling a lot of the products, or they're selling to a different customer that's not strategically aligned with what you want as an organisation.
Yeah, you've absolutely nailed the situation that I'm also observing, and I'm pleased to hear that the data supports that in one way. Because, it's validating, but it's also, not that great. Even the companies that I would say are remunerating their teams based on margin growth, they're not necessarily supporting them as well with the development, or giving them, any kind of improved capability in order to do that, because people can hear that. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, really, if I come back to everything, more sales or, more revenue is going to improve bottom line. Well, not necessarily. They don't understand how to sell commercially. They don't understand cost of sale. They don't understand customer acquisition cost. And then they don't understand cost to serve as well. And which goes far deeper than just going out there and trying to hit those numbers. And I see a lot of firms now starting to pick up on the fact that they need to develop their people. But again, Trudy, and I'd love to hear what you're observing and what your research has uncovered here. When they develop them, we're almost going back to basics here.
Yes.
Because there's been such a deficit in and I know I'm banging on about salespeople here, but, it's my wheelhouse. But, we're going back to basics, and so that's what I'm saying about that deeper skill set. They need those basics because they've never been given them. There's been an expectation that they're going to come, ready-made with all of those skills, which is fine in an easier economy. Like you were saying, 5 years ago, look, as long as you had a smile on your face, you turned up on time, and you were consistent, you were probably going to get the gig, as long as you were good at relationship building.
Yes.
But now we need people that can commercially engage. So we've got this, they need the basics, and then they need that deeper skill set, which means that companies need to take their people on a journey.
Yeah, that's right. And Ingrid, I'm even seeing another layer. So I've recently just finished a project for an organisation where I helped them redesign their sales commission schemes. And the reason they called me in the first place is the schemes that they had in place were set up some years ago, and people were now starting to sell well beyond what they expected because the clients and the trailing commission had started to accumulate over time. And the commission rates that they were paying at the highest level were not commercially feasible. It wasn't sustainable. And it's because they had an old scheme that didn't think about scale, and now they'd got into a position where the margins weren't there. They were going to start losing money, frankly. Right. So they've asked me to come in and redesign it. And the interesting outcome of that was actually a whole restructuring of the sales function. And I think this is really interesting. So that the upskilling is not necessarily just with the individuals in the sales roles. Sometimes it's with leadership as well. And starting to think really carefully around what is the ideal structure for us to continue to be able to scale as an organisation. But how do we make sure individuals can scale? And I think this is so important. You've a number of times mentioned career development and growth for individual salespeople. If we want to retain them and if we want to motivate them, they need to see what their path or journey is to scale. And this relentless pursuit of doing more and more and more is not the path. It means that we'll have burnt out individuals that will actually just up and leave. And one of the things that became very evident through this assignment is the need to reconsider what information we're sharing with our salespeople so that we can build their commercial awareness, so that they can understand gross margins and cost of acquisition and the impact of rework or not selling the products that are aligned to where we need to go. But then that has deeper implications for then our systems and our technology, because we may not be able to easily do that. So even though on the surface it can seem so inherently simple, I need to hire a salesperson, what am I going to pay them? There's layers and layers to this if you really want to get it right and if you want to be a sustainable high-performance organisation.
I so agree. I mean, I recently had somebody approach me, and this organisation is, one of the directors is an accountant.
Right.
So really great with numbers, really seen the business through some pretty tricky times, particularly over COVID. However, when it comes to getting the numbers right, they might do that, but then aligning that too with something that's going to be motivating. Like they're just thinking about commission.
Yes.
And they're just thinking about commission on a sale, which is becoming like if you listen to their sales team, it's becoming harder and harder for them to be competitive, because they've got one close competitor that's really discounting heavily, hiding cost. They manufacture overseas so they can get product costs for less. They hide, other costs. I don't want to say too much in case I give away the business, but and they change the commissions on the salespeople with relative frequency, which means that there's some uncertainty, there's, a bit of fear there. So, Trudy, without, making it applicable to any one company, I mean, so you talked about those 4 areas. You talked about, the development opportunities, culture, benefit, and then remuneration. But how if you don't know the stuff that you know, where do you really start to build something that is, boots on the ground? How am I going to structure my commissions? But beyond just what works from a numbers perspective.
Yeah. So I think the other, so the principle I spoke about was strategic alignment, and that's the starting point. Understand your business strategy, understand the customer experience you're looking for, and then ask yourself, what are the behaviours I want my sales force to engage in? And then how do I reward the right behaviours and the right outcomes? And so one of the obvious things to think about there is, to what extent do I want my sales team members working individually versus actually working as a team? And the answer might be both. And if that's the case, how do you then align your variable reward or your commission to reward those things? And we've all seen it in organisations, the sales gorillas, as they used to be called, where you've got your highest performing salesperson. However, their ability to service the internal customer is not even on their radar. So what we've got is damage to relationships. We've got them not following the processes. However, all of the poor behaviour is tolerated because we don't want to lose our best salesperson. And I've seen this time and time again. Finally, someone has the courage to move that person on, and the whole organisation lifts, because now we're actually working as a high-performing team. And there's a big difference between high-performing individuals versus high-performing teams. And I think that's one of the most important strategic questions we can ask that will cascade down into how you design the incentive scheme. The other factor that's incredibly important is the concept of fairness. Now, fairness goes 2 ways. So whatever that scheme looks like needs to be fair to the individual.
Yes.
It also needs to be fair to the organisation. And let me talk about this from an organisational perspective for a moment. You will be paying your salespeople a base salary, and it should be a fair base salary based on market research, ideally market median or just above, if you can afford it, right? And psychologically, that's really important, because if people know that they're paid just above average and they've got a whole range of other things, culture, development, benefits, it's like, you know what, this feels good. So keep your base salaries as low as you can, but fair. That's my philosophy. From there, you can have significant upside that rewards performance. And this is where your commissions or your variable schemes come into place. However, something that's really important for the organisation is to recognise that we are paying you a base salary and we expect performance in return for that. So one of the mistakes I often see organisations make is that they will pay their salespeople commission from the first dollar that they sell. You don't need to do that. If you're paying a salesperson, let's call it $60,000 a year, you expect them to actually give you something for that $60,000 a year. So this concept of having a minimum threshold, which might be 75% of their target before the commission kicks in, is actually really, really important from a fairness perspective. Now, that's fair to the organisation. What does fairness look like to the individual? Well, there's a few things. Number one is there should be full transparency. So they should know exactly what they need to do to earn more money. The second thing is that they should feel that they are getting rewarded for their effort. So this is where we now start to think about the role of individual versus team. What does it mean if I sell a multi-year deal? Do I only get rewarded on that for the first year? Is there trailing commission? So consulting with your sales team is actually a really important part of the process to unpack all of these areas, because if you can get their buy-in to what they're being measured and how they're going to be held accountable, and you can have a really open discussion around any unintended consequences of a commission scheme, then you've got a pretty good chance of getting it right.
Gosh, that's fantastic to hear, just to really around that engagement. I want to come back to something that you said before about rewarding the right behaviours, because again, we can say one thing, and then, you know, even when it comes to KPIs, for example, the KPIs, let alone the commission structure or the way that we've, you know, geared our remuneration, can in fact be driving unintended behaviours. You know, we're saying one thing, but we're actually driving another by, you know, encouraging this sort of behaviour if we want that. So are you able to, without mentioning any company names, a company that you've worked with that's got it, you know, that's worked with you to get this right, and what that might look like, so that some of the companies and sales leaders who are listening and thinking about, gosh, okay, what do we do next year with our commission structures, with our, you know, total rewards thinking and mindset around remuneration? You know, what's an example of someone who's got it right?
Yeah. So the mindset of organisations and leaders who get it right is that they need to not rely on the commission scheme as their only lever of performance, or the only leverage they've got to maximise performance of their team. So what great leaders do is they stand back, and the first thing they do is they engage their sales and team in a conversation that says, what does it mean to be great? And let's define this. And we're going to define this holistically. Being great is not just about hitting a sales target. That's one element of your role. There will be other elements that relate to the customer experience. You know, what's the CX and what's their role in doing that? What's their role in creating an incredible culture internally within the organisation? What's their role in terms of bringing ideas and initiatives and innovations to the table? What's their role in terms of continuous improvement? What does great look like in terms of their ongoing learning? So there's so much to this, and I think that's the starting point to get really clear with your salespeople around what it means to be great, not good. And it's a whole picture. Once you've done that, the important thing is not to lose sight of the role of leadership in driving high performance. And let's talk about the basics here. We need to create a feedback-rich culture, and we need to be really good at holding people accountable. Okay. Now, one of the things that I have found organisations do with their sales team that get this right is accountability is no longer one-on-one combat. And it feels like combat, right? When you have these one-on-one catch-ups and it's, you know, you're not hitting your number and what are we going to do? To making accountability a team sport. So let's now think about how do we create this wonderful, psychologically safe team environment where the sales leader is part of that team. They're not sitting on top of the team, they are part of that team. And everybody in that team, including the sales leader, is with transparency sharing how they're tracking, not only against their sales targets, but against the other elements of their role that make them great. And as a team, we're being vulnerable and saying, you know what, I'm struggling with this. I haven't been able to bring any external insights into this team because X. Team, can you help me with this? What are you guys doing? How can I get better at this? So as a leader, the most important thing you can do is create a culture and an environment of transparency, of vulnerability, of high support, so that we're helping each other succeed. And that's what it means to be a high-performance team. If you can get that right, the commission scheme is just the cream on the crop because the results will happen.
Yeah.
The commission scheme will not drive the results. The culture, the way you engage as a leader will drive the results. The commission will reinforce and recognise and reward the outcomes, and that will really support the internal drive and motivation to keep going.
So that to me is also a recipe for greater levels of retention. So you've got this fantastic, high-performing team where there's high levels of transparency, vulnerability, and high support. What a trifecta. So can you talk for a little bit on the role? So we've talked about attraction with great talent, and I know we focused a lot on sales. But when it comes to retaining great talent, because that's the other issue, and I spoke with Jerry Kleeman yesterday, and I always ask him, what are your members telling you that it's on their minds for next year? And he said, finding and keeping great talent, it just still is the most important thing. So we've talked a little bit about attraction here. What's the role of an induction program and a really solid onboarding program as part of that, that transparency, that vulnerability and that high support, in order to make sure that somebody goes, gee, I made the right decision coming on board here. It sounded great and it is great. And now I'm really motivated and I really want to contribute and I really want to do my best work here. And I know that I'm going to grow.
Yes. So I think a really great onboarding or induction program has two key objectives. One is to fulfill the psychological contract that you have with your new hire. Now, that's a whole lot of jargon, but what do I mean by that? What I mean is through the whole recruitment process, you will be creating a perception in your new hire's mind around what their new life is going to look like, what the culture is going to feel like, what this job is going to look like, how much money they can earn, what it's going to feel like on a day-to-day. So they turn up on day one excited. However, for so many organisations, day one can just be this big anticlimax where I don't feel connected, I don't feel valued, suddenly I'm on my own, I'm overwhelmed. So we've generally got about 3 months to fulfil the psychological contract that people have. And it starts with day one, but it doesn't end on day 5. And I think that's a really important message, because a lot of onboarding or induction programs are, here's your week-long induction, off you go swim. So I think the first thing is being very conscious of how the new employee feels, what are the perceptions that you've created, and how do we make sure that we're delivering on those? And that means actually checking in with them very regularly, probably weekly, I would suggest, for the first 2 months, and then maybe fortnightly after that. We need to be checking in. What's working? What are we not delivering? What did you expect? Where are the gaps? So it becomes a really important two-way dialogue. So that's the first purpose. Let's fulfill that psychological contract, because that, to your point, Ingrid, is going to get them going, great, let's give this everything. This is where I want to be, versus, oh boy, I think I've made a mistake. And we know it's only going to spiral down from there. The role of the manager is absolutely critical in that process. I can't reinforce that enough. The second purpose is to get them as productive as soon as possible, right? And we all know that there's a ramp-up period until we get to be fully productive. So having a structured learning and development program that starts from day one. So the way I'd like you to think about induction is just the first phase of your lifelong learning and development that we're going to invest in you in. It's not a week-long program and then we leave you. So recognising what it's going to take to get that person productive as quickly as possible, that's a win-win situation. It's a win for them. They'll be earning their commissions quicker. It's an obvious win for the organisation. So what is the knowledge? Who are the relationships they need to know? Do they understand our ways of working internally? How do we set them up for success? And that requires coaching and mentoring and staying really close to them. And there's probably a third area actually that induction should serve, and that is to assimilate that person with the culture and hence the ways of working with your organisation. We can't assume that for a new person coming in that they understand our values and how we do things and how things get done around here. And all organisations have their nuances, hopefully not too political, but some of them are. We need to understand all of that. So how do we assimilate them with the culture? How do we set the expectation that it's safe to speak up in meetings, that it's actually safe to challenge the leader? And one of the most powerful things I've seen for new people coming in is for the full team to share their user manual of me. And what I'm talking about there is, as a new member of the team, you don't have a lot of psychological safety. You don't know the other team members. You don't know how to engage with them, if you can give them feedback, if you can ask for help. Can I interrupt you? Are you going to get defensive? There's so many unknowns. Rather than waiting for that process to happen over years, in some cases through experience, how do we fast track it and put it out there right at the start, including giving the new employee, the individual, to say, here's the user manual of me. Here's how I like to work. When I put do not disturb on my Teams meeting, it means I'm writing a deep proposal or a tender. Please don't interrupt me. However, I'm going to schedule time in the day when you can check in with me, because I really love to bounce ideas. Or don't send me a big long email. I'm not going to read it. But pick up the phone and call me, because I love to just brainstorm ideas, those kinds of things.
Which means then, Trudy, that, then this comes back to culture and ways of working, that an organisation needs to be clear about how everyone's involved in that induction process, because it's not just one person taking a new employee through that process. To do that really well and to set someone up for success, lots of people need to be involved, because you've got internal customers and then you've got your external customers, regardless of roles. So this goes way beyond sales, obviously, but and you know how you talked about a structured L&D program that incorporates things like values and how we do things, and when did that all get a bit lost? Because going right back, that was my experience really early on, whether I was a casual working for an organisation or whether I was coming on board with a leadership role. And the induction was congruent across the organisation for any kind of role, and then it would be nuanced depending on the role from that point onwards. And there was absolutely an understanding that there would be ongoing professional development. It was really just how much did you want and what was, your contribution going to be towards making that successful. But then over the years, it kind of got eroded into this, 15-minute, go onto our portal and watch an OC health and safety video and complete that. And it's a tick and flick exercise about making sure that we're covered rather than setting somebody up for real success.
Yeah, absolutely. And there has been a shift. In my view, there's been two triggers for that. One is post-COVID. A lot of leaders are experiencing role compression. And what I'm referring to is they're doing parts of other people's jobs. It's a classic Aussie greeting. How are you? I'm busy. It used to be a badge of honour. Now it often means I'm on the brink of burnout. And that's often where those conversations lead. And I'm finding a lot of managers and leaders, because they haven't had fully resourced teams, or because their teams aren't performing at the required level, they're stepping in and they're supporting their teams with good intentions, but it's leading to role compression. They're doing more and more. They're being pulled from pillar to post. I think one of the root cause factors is managers just don't have time. There is not enough headspace. There is not enough physical time to engage in the incredibly powerful induction that you spoke about, Ingrid, when you joined the workforce. The second reason why it may not be happening, I think, is possibly around individuals working hybrid and working remote, and it's happening more and more. And as a result of that, we're just not feeling as connected with each other, and we may not appreciate the importance of developing strong, high-trust relationships so that team members can actually call on their colleagues to get advice and to get support. If we don't consciously facilitate that kind of connection and relationship, and a lot of leaders aren't thinking about it because it's a new way of leading, then what happens is we're not actually fully inducting people. People are feeling very isolated. They're actually feeling very lonely. And there's a whole lot of research around this as well, because they don't have those meaningful connections and relationships at work.
Yeah, you're describing so many of my clients. When you talk about that compression of roles, and regardless of the size of the organisation that's happening, whether it's, we're talking about owners here who have grown a business, and then are trying to kind of step away, or empower other people to, to take those areas on, or whether it's an organisation with really clearly defined leadership roles. That's absolutely the case, and you're saying that that's one of the contributors to burnout.
Absolutely.
Yeah, gosh. Okay. Yeah. So I wanted to talk to you now. I know we've only got a limited amount of time, and I could, if I had my way, I'd love to sit you down and go, tell me everything you know. We'd be here for a long time. But just talking now to career pathways, this is something that I've noticed has started to re-emerge, to my absolute delight, with an awareness from organisations. And again, I know that I'm talking sales specific here, but I think organisations are understanding that in order for us to get greater levels of retention in our sales talent, we need to be offering them, to your point about, development, ongoing development, that there is career progression here.
Yes.
So besides the obvious roles, like, okay, you can start here and you can move through, these are the types of roles that you can take on if you're kind of got your sights set on, this leadership role up here.
Yeah.
Besides all of that, how can an organisation set their people up for realising those stepping stones towards, the next role, and then the one after that, and then the one after that?
Yeah, and Ingrid, it's such an important part of organisations' people practices if they want to retain and get the best out of their talent. I was actually talking to a young person recently who's working in a retail sales role for a national organisation.
Yep.
So the structure of that organisation is they've got lots of retail stores, they've got many, many salespeople at different levels, store right through to regional to state. And then they've got their corporate structure as well. Now, this individual is also in their final year of university, and they're studying business, they're studying finance, but they're in a sales role, and that's been their university gig. And I actually asked this person, I said, look, from a career perspective, tell me, what does Nevada look like? What would this organisation do? And I think it was so fascinating just to hear this young person's perspective, and it really reinforced to me that it's not a one-size-fits-all. But the first thing that they shared is, I want to know what development I can engage in so that I can earn more commission. And I think that's interesting, because at that early stage of your career, what you're probably thinking about is, first of all, money is important to me right now. I'm trying to live. I'm trying to save for possibly a house, and that's a whole other conversation around how easy that is or isn't.
Yes.
But that was a key motivator. What other products or services can I become skilled in selling so that I can earn more commission? And I thought, okay, that's interesting. And then I encouraged them to look a little further beyond just the next paycheck, right? And they said, well, actually, I'm at university and I'm studying finance, so I can't see myself being a salesperson for the rest of my life, because my interest and my skill set is actually broader than that. And they said, what would actually be fantastic is if there was a conversation from my leader to myself to actually understand me and what my skill set is. He said, I don't even know that I'm studying finance, right? So what is my skill set? What is my background? What could I bring to the table? And in this broader organisation, beyond the role that I'm in, beyond this store that I'm in, what are the opportunities? And what could be a potential pathway to maybe move into a finance role in head office? Yeah. And he said, you know what, if I knew that the logical path would be to move from a casual to a perm, and then from that permanent role to move your way up through the store environment where I'd get more exposure to the commercials and start to understand how the store runs commercially, which may then enable me to make a lateral move into a junior finance role in the corporate office.
Yes.
He said, you know what? Amazing. I would stick with this organisation because I can see there's clear alignment between my personal interests and what they can offer.
Yeah.
And I think you can see from this young person's perspective, if that were the conversation, and if it were a regular conversation and there were a map and then a plan to help support them on that journey without any promises, but they could see what the journey was, they're not going to go anywhere. And the discretionary effort would be through the roof. So I think that's interesting to think about from a young person's perspective. But now let's think about somebody who's been in the role for a while. Yeah. And the mistake that so many organisations make is they promote their best salesperson into a sales manager, which doesn't always work because it's a different role. And if you think about what really drives and motivates a salesperson, it may not be managing people and all of the challenges that go with that, all the administration that sits behind it. So I think there's such a powerful... So it comes back to, are we having meaningful conversations in a safe space where individuals can declare what they love about their roles, what motivates them, what gives them their mojo, what gets them out of bed, guiding them towards what career development can look like, and recognising that for some people that does not mean moving into a different role. It might actually be a conversation to be, how can you be the region's best salesperson? What development can we help you with? How can you become the state's best salesperson? How can you become Australia's best salesperson? How do we set you up as a guru or an expert in your area of space so you become an influencer? What is the dream? What's possible? And how do we support you with that? And I think this is so incredibly important because if people are not growing, if people are not developing, they stagnate.
Yep.
They stand still. That's not good for the organisation. But individually what happens is we become demotivated and we start to move backwards. And this is where I think we've seen with so many people across society in these last few years, not only are we busy, but we're not learning and growing. And it's such a dangerous combination. Busy on the treadmill versus how can I focus in on the things that matter, make sure that it's a safe place to learn and experiment, because that's where we get the energy and the mojo. We love having goals to work towards, and they don't have to be sales targets as goals. They can be professional development goals, and that's often what will give us energy and purpose.
You're so right. I can't help but think that it comes back to an organisation actually being completely aware or self-aware, if that's possible for an organisation to be, certainly for the director levels or the C-suite to be completely clear about the type of organisation it is and therefore the type of people who are going to be attracted to it, the structure that it provides, and where it's relatively flat, what that actually means for us around the types of individuals who will be motivated to stay here and what we can do to support that over, like you said, over that person who's just starting out in their career, or even, just because someone's starting out in their career doesn't necessarily mean that they want to, grow beyond, from role to role to role either. They might want to be the best and go deep in their level of expertise. But I think that it requires an organisation to understand that. And then I was thinking, as you were saying that, I thought, I see such a deficit in so many organisations of being able to even have that capability to have those conversations. Like I think about organisations that even have an HR manager in there. A lot of HR managers today are IR specialists, or they're really just looking at things like superannuation, compliance, occ health and safety, work cover. Maybe they'll look at some L&D, but they're certainly not necessarily sitting down people on a regular basis, or even being someone that they can go to say, do you know what, I'd really love to explore a career here.
Yeah.
How do we start that conversation? I mean, even if someone was that motivated, there might not be that person to go to. Where there isn't that person to go to, does an individual, that individual that you spoke with, that young person who's studying the degree, started in sales, did they approach you, or was the organisation working with you?
Yeah, so the organisation was working with me, and I took the opportunity to have the conversation.
Yeah.
Ingrid, you're right. I think there's two elements to this. One is I truly believe that managers, even supervisors, need to have the training to own their people. We can't be handballing our people to HR, right? So this now becomes a business challenge to say, how do we invest in developing leadership capability and management capability? Because this is really 101. It is foundational. Are we having conversations with our people to understand what drives them, what their futures look like, what are their dreams and aspirations, and how can our organisation support you to fulfil those dreams and aspirations? It is absolutely foundational. Yeah. And hence there's so much focus in the last few years for many organisations to really lean in on leadership development. Yeah. There's also a role for the corporate function or the business function to set up the practices and the frameworks. So those leaders and managers and supervisors need the tools to say, this is what a career path could look like. Yeah. Now, when it comes to actually developing individuals, I truly believe that the individual actually needs to own their development. Yep. It's not the role of the leader. The role of the leader is to open up the conversation and to inspire and to motivate and to help create opportunities and open doors. The individual has to drive their own development. Now, what can that look like really practically? Let's go back to this young person example, right? So they say, look, I want to be in corporate finance one day. That's my dream. I want to be the CFO of a company. Fantastic. You're in an entry-level sales role right now. The next step might be to develop you to become a assistant store manager, because you're going to get more exposure to the commercials and the finances, and that's aligned with where you want to go. So they can now see the connection. For the store manager in that store, in the absence of formal development programs, which they may or may not have access to for their people, the most powerful thing they can do is, in writing, create a development plan. And I'm a really big fan of either a 90-day plan or a 30-day plan in the context of the bigger picture. And in that 90 or 30-day plan, there's a really important framework for them to understand, which is called the 70-20-10 rule. And what that means is 70% of our learning comes through doing. It's on-the-job experience, it's exposure. 20% comes from feedback and coaching from others. So that's where the manager can play a really important role. And only 10% comes through formal learning. So how can that manager leverage the 70% and say, within my span of control, within this store, in this example, how can I give this individual access and exposure to situations, to tricky conversations, to sitting alongside me when I'm looking at the rostering or the budgeting, to build their capability. And if you can write down those goals, this month we're going to focus on rostering. Next month we're going to focus on looking at how we can improve our gross margin and some ideas around that. Incorporate it into day-to-day operations. That will drive and accelerate development quicker than anything else. And it's something that supervisors and managers at any level can actually control.
Oh, that's magnificent. What fantastic, very, very practical advice and suggestions that you've just shared there, Trudy. Thank you. I just want to finish up our conversation to kind of come full circle back to our first conversation, which was really around, well, we included looking at the 5 generations that are now in the workforce.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I know that boomers are starting to leave the workforce, but now you've got Gen X, then you've got Gen Y, millennials, and Gen Z. What can organisations do or leaders do to tap into that gold mine of, you know, that richness and depth of experience and excitement and enthusiasm more thoughtfully to create and retain, you know, things like company wisdom or stronger cultures or provide deeper meaning?
Yeah, it's such an important opportunity that leaders have. The conversation I often hear, though, is behind closed doors with leadership teams. The younger generation, we just don't understand them. They're entitled. So all the stereotypes come out. And likewise, when I engage with younger people, what I hear is, ageist comments, frankly. They don't understand AI, that they're falling behind. So I think the first thing is creating a space for mutual understanding and connection, because there are stereotypes and there's frustrations. So we need to break through all of that and create a level of empathy between generations. And going back to the idea we discussed earlier, the user manual of me, what a great way for a boomer to share with a Gen Z or a millennial, this is how to work with me, and let me help you understand why I work this way. And I don't get AI, but here's how I do things, and here's how I build relationships. And I think as part of that, there's so much we can learn from each other. So that's the first thing. Let's break down the barriers. Let's create a high trust environment where we're open to listening and learning from each other. I think the second thing is creating meaningful opportunities cross-generationally for individuals to work together on meaningful projects. Okay. So most organisations will have a strategic plan, they'll have strategic initiatives, they might cascade down to departments. How do we take those and be very deliberate around saying, let's come into the office, if that makes sense, for your organisation. Let's come together with cross-functional or multi-generational teams and create a reason to work together. Yeah. I think that's one of the most powerful things you can do. So sometimes this means, and let's think about salespeople again, we want them to focus on selling, right? And in fact, often we want to remove the distractions. However, if you can carve out just 5% of their time to be working on an improvement initiative or a strategic project, that will actually bolster their motivation for selling, because they're building different relationships, there's new learning, the neurons are firing differently. There's so many benefits from that. The other thing that I find to be exceptionally powerful is to consider setting up informal or formal mentoring relationships. And mentoring is not always top down. So let's now think about upward mentoring. And I think if we can create this environment where everybody feels equal, so for a young person you are just as valuable as someone who's been here for 30 years, and there's so much that you can contribute to this organisation and this team that others can't. Let's play to everybody's strengths and let's see if we can set up those relationships. Our younger generations particularly, they've grown up in an entrepreneurial environment. They've all got a side gig, right? They're either driving Ubers, or they've got their own side business, or they're thinking about it if they're not doing it. How do we keep them focused on the business and think about intrapreneurship rather than entrepreneurship? How do we create opportunities internally to say, you know what, here's an opportunity. Let's take AI as an example. Let's set up a project with very clear parameters, get a cross-functional team together. So let's see how we can leverage AI to 10x our customer experience next year and set that as a goal for them. They're the kinds of things I think that can really leverage the richness that we've got with multiple generations.
And then if you did that, I mean, everyone wins really, because you like you said, with all of those neurons firing and an opportunity to experience someone in a different way, because it goes beyond just a role where we can pigeonhole people into all sorts of qualities that they may or may not have. We're experiencing them in a new and different way. We've got a shared purpose, a common goal to work towards, which is going to connect people more deeply to the organisation, create greater opportunities for growth, which is going to lead to greater retention rates. And, and I was just thinking, gee, there are so many organisations that I think could really, take that on as well, Trudy. So, look, I'd like to say thank yous again for... You always bring it. Like the level of preparation is extraordinary, and I just really appreciate that. There are so many concepts that have fallen out for me from today that I just think are so powerful. Given how we do this podcast, though, it might be, quite a few weeks until this episode comes out.
Yeah.
So you do lots of introductions to some of these programs that you offer. Where can people find that in a current way, so that they're always on top of it? Is it through LinkedIn? Is it through your website?
Yeah, thank you, Ingrid. So probably the best sources are either LinkedIn, and that's
Yep.
just my name, Trudy MacDonald, MAC. I've, in the last 6 months, set up an Instagram account, and we're really focused on putting really practical tips out there. So the handle for that is Trudy MacDonald Leadership. And then there's our website, which is talentcodehr.com.au. And we're always putting either client testimonials or case studies up there. A lot of our clients love to hear from other organisations who've worked for us and the kinds of experiences they've had. So that's all available there as well.
Terrific. Well, we'll make sure that in addition to people hearing that, and if they're driving and they're thinking, I couldn't write that down, I'll make sure that they're in all of those handles are in the show notes as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ingrid. It's a pleasure to be invited back on the Sales Revolution. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you. Okay, you've been listening to The Sales Revolution. I'm Ingrid Maynard. And to find out how the Sales Doctor can help your organisation to transform its revenue, growth and profit, please email me at ingrid@thesalesdoctor.com.au. Visit us on our website at www.thesalesdoctor.com.au. I look forward to your company next episode. Bye for now.